everyone. I am LauraTKelso, downsizing specialist with Next Home Champions Real Estate, and also the creator of this series, the Grand Rapids Savvy Senior Learning Series. Oh, that's so sweet. You guys are very sweet. I just want to welcome all of you here today on this beautiful Grand Rapids fall day. It is absolutely my pleasure to be able to host these, and I absolutely could not do that without the huge amount of assistance that I get from the sponsors that help promote this series that you see around the room, all of my educational partners, the wonderful ladies that helped check you in today, Mary Jo and Brooke and Allison. Can you give them a quick round of applause? All right, so do you know that that average person makes around 35,000 remotely conscious decisions each day? 35,000. Now, I know that's true because I read it on the internet, right? Okay, so I did read that on the internet, so I don't really know what the actual true number is, but needless to say, it's a lot. And every single day, we might think about what to eat and what to wear and where to go, and did you sign up for the GR Savvy Seniors talk, and do you feel good enough to go today? Well, that's a no-brainer because we're going to put on a great presentation today, so we know that you all wanted to be here. But in terms of if you've ever felt like making just one more decision, even a small one, was going to put you over the edge, raise your hand. Okay. All right, you guys should all be raising your hands, or you should be up here teaching this class, I promise you. Because I know that there have been many, many days, and still are, when I feel like I am overwhelmed making decisions. And there's actually a term for that, and it's called decision fatigue. And even though they are little insignificant decisions based on all the other things that are going on in our lives, they can really be mentally taxing on our system to make those small decisions. And especially if you are going through any type of a big transition in life, or planning an event, or something has changed, that decision fatigue can be even more pronounced. So what happens then when it comes to the big decisions? If little decisions can exhaust us, what about the ones that affect our families, our closest relationships, our finances, where we live, the ones that can have much bigger outcomes that could be good or bad depending on whether we make the right decision? That can be very challenging. So today, we're going to be diving into the complicated psychology and actually physiology of decision making. Can you imagine? It's not only something with our mind, but literally our bodies react differently when we are contemplating making changes in our lives. So why is it that some people can seemingly make the most important decisions with confidence, and yet some of us struggle with what we call analysis paralysis, even after we have seemingly really looked at and evaluated our options? Have any of you thought about that or acknowledged that? Yeah, it can be really, really challenging. So I feel like the challenges of this also become harder as we age. Because once upon a time when we were younger, if we were making these big decisions, we always knew that we had the luxury of time. So if we were choosing where we were going to live, or where we were going to go to school, or for that matter, even somebody that we were in a relationship with, if something didn't work out, we always knew that we had the time to pivot, to do something different, to change our course. But as people get older, you simply no longer have that luxury of time. Have you experienced that it feels like making these decisions can have a lot greater impact because the thought of doing it wrong, whatever that is, that can have some really big consequences, right? And yet we also know that by not making a decision, we are also truly making a decision, right? And often that inevitable outcome of not making a decision is something that we would not have chosen for ourselves if we had truly taken the time to evaluate the options and choose, or even have, really have the courage to choose what we wanted. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the things that we think about, the things that hold us back, and how can we move past it to a place, move from that stage of overwhelm to a stage of proactively determining our options and writing our own future. All right. With that, I'm going to let our two very amazing speakers, we only have two of them today because I'm telling you it's going to be a powerhouse. These two are amazing. So we're going to start by letting Diane introduce herself, and then Dr. Jason Beckrow.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Laura. Oh my gosh, she hit on so many great topics and points. So I'm Diane. I'm a licensed professional counselor here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I can't see over my cards. Hello. I'll sit up straight like my mom always said. Sit up straight. So I specialize in brain performance, and I'm married to Dan, who's in the back of the room. Hi, honey. He came because he felt like it was a kids event, and I'm watching my kid do their thing. So he walked in going, this is like it was when we were going to school with our kids. Anyhow, thank you for having me, and I look forward to contributing to the topic.
Laura, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm curious, there might be some divine intervention at play. I was actually scheduled to be here back earlier in the fall, in September, and I got COVID for the second time. Again, I've been very fortunate. I've had it twice. It's been very mild both times, but I wasn't able to come then. But the topic today is so perfect. As Laura mentioned, I'm a physician. I wear a lot of different hats. I'm trained as a medical oncologist. I do hospice and palliative medicine. I also teach medical students. And most of my career now is spent with helping families try to make very, very tough decisions. What I love about this group here and the opportunity here is later this afternoon I'll be in an ICU back in Lansing with a family who are grappling with should we or shouldn't we? A lot of life and death decisions, and they haven't really had an opportunity to think proactively. And what's so important about this group here is that's what this is, and that is our collective goal as medical professionals, is helping educate all of our patients, everyone in society, so that when those difficult forks in the road arise, that you have a plan and that your wishes are respected. So Laura, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today.
You're welcome. I appreciate both of you being here. And I've really been toying with this subject matter for a long time in my head. Just that idea of, I work with people all the time to try and teach and encourage, and yet I often see people who, even with all of the options, have a great struggle to move forward and determine what their best course of action is. And that can be challenging, because then on the flip side of that, then sometimes myself or someone like Tom from Assisted Living Locators or some of these other people that I work alongside so closely will get a call that is because someone is now in a critical situation where they've waited too long, there's been an accident or a change in health of any type, and then all of a sudden those changes are imminent and we have to do things quickly, and it's no longer the luxury of having time. So it's just my hope and my privilege to really encourage you to be proactive and to be confident when you have checked out your options, learned what you needed to learn, and to be able to feel confident in the decisions that you make. So with that, Diane, as a licensed professional counselor, you see people traveling through large and small stages of change on a daily basis. Let's start by touching on why is it so hard for most of us in the first place when we think about making a change in our life?
Great question. Okay, so I'm going to open it up first of all and ask each of you to think of a change you're considering. So while we're discussing these matters, think of something that you are currently wrestling with. And it can be as small as, what am I going to make for Thanksgiving? Or, should I go to my sister's house or should we host it here? Or a decision about your future or, your home life or estate planning or, whatever it is. So as we're discussing these questions, think about your current struggles, and it could be more than one. So we can kind of get it to a personal level for you. So to begin, the process of change, first of all, is very hard. So I'm a therapist. I work with people in my office every day who are wrestling with trying to do something new. The process of therapy is about change, and so we are wrestling with change all the time. It's very normal to struggle with change. We like routine, we like things the same, we don't want to change, usually. Maybe if you're that 1 in a million person who's super spontaneous and doesn't even think about the consequences, but that's very rare. That's usually a 2-year-old who's frolicking on a playground somewhere. So one of the aspects of why it's so difficult for us is our brain. Our brain is a lovely, wonderful response organ. It has a big job. And one of the biggest jobs of your brain is to keep you safe. And that is generally the biggest job. So the brain uses the 5 senses to take in information and respond. And its number one job is to keep you safe. So the brain's going to warn you, uh-oh, watch out, here comes a curb. Don't miss your step. Uh-oh, there's a threat. The roads are icy. Oh no, it's gonna rain. Uh-oh, I forgot my shoes. Well, we wouldn't forget our shoes. We're all grown-ups. But you know what I mean? I forgot my phone. Or, I can't remember where I put my keys. So the first thing your brain's gonna do is assess for danger and determine if this is a real threat. And what happens? We go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. There's 4 responses that we go into. Fight, which is, I'm gonna fight you because I'm trying to stay safe. Flight, I'm gonna run because I don't feel safe. Or I'm gonna fawn, which is just imagine a deer sitting there looking cute and freeze. So this is what your brain does on a regular basis every time you're contemplating something. And the brain doesn't know the difference. Research has shown the brain doesn't know the difference between a real threat or an imagined one. So you can just be thinking about how hard something's going to be. You can just be thinking about all the reasons not to do something. Or you can just be thinking about how scared you are. And the brain goes, oops, we have a problem. And it goes straight to a high arousal response. So that's one of the primary reasons why change is so difficult, is the brain is wired to keep you safe and it's fear-based for a reason. You're just going to immediately go to, I'm afraid. So it's completely normal.
I did have to laugh on the shoe comment because I haven't walked out without shoes. I have walked out with 2 different ones in different colors because I have the same shoe in 2 different colors. So that's never good as an adult. So if our brains are essentially working against us when we consider changing from our status quo, what does it look like from the time someone initially considers something to a time when they actually move and feel comfortable acting on a thought or an idea?
Right, so I immediately go to what I would think of as the stages of change. So there are 5 stages. And there's other theories that kind of have 6 or 7, but we all kind of agree that there's this change model. And the first one is pre-contemplation. It's a fancy term for, I'm not even thinking about changing. I'm not contemplating it. Or, someone has said something to me, but yeah, I'm not interested in changing. So sometimes we call this denial, or procrastination, or just lack of self-awareness. And the second one is contemplation. And generally speaking, experts agree that we kind of move through these stages. So we kind of start in this pre-contemplation denial stage. We move to contemplation, which is a fancy term for, oh, I'm starting to think about it. I'm starting to kind of weigh the pros and cons of my decision. I'm starting to maybe listen to go to a Savvy Seniors thing, right? Like, I'm starting to kind of be aware of, I might be doing a little bit of research. And then and the intention of change. So contemplation is I'm intending to change. And I see the change in the foreseeable future. The third stage is preparation. Oh, so now I'm starting to do stuff. And we're really kind of determined. And then the fourth stage is action. We have decided to change and we are making some steps. We are acting. And then the fifth stage is maintenance of the change. Within each one of these stages, we have resistance. Resistance is a normal, human, research-based dynamic of change. So when my clients come into my room and they say, I just really don't feel like it, I just really don't want to, or they just go, no way, I'm not doing that, then to me that's, oh, okay, we're experiencing some resistance. So as you're looking at these changes that you're considering, notice, oh, I'm acting a little resistant. I'm getting kind of activated or nervous or stubborn or, getting in my own way. And researchers and theorists and psychologists and therapists, we always ask ourselves, what needs to happen to move from pre-contemplation to contemplation? Contemplation to preparation. What needs to happen in order for that to occur? And there's a lot of good answers in that realm.
Get in our own way. We've never done that, right? Right? Never. So one of the things that you and I discussed was that idea of a risk versus reward when you're making a decision. So I think of this often as I'm helping seniors downsize, because most every client that I work with almost always has some version of, I can't believe I didn't do this sooner, once they're safely settled, and yet I know that they agonized, sometimes for years, to get to that point of feeling comfortable for that and for actually pulling the trigger. So how can you talk a little bit more about that idea of looking at the risk versus reward as a catalyst to moving forward?
Right, so that's one of the things I look at with my clients is what is the risk of this change and what is the reward of this change? And usually we don't make a decision unless the risk outweighs the reward, because we really like rewards, right? Just think about it. And even from the brain's perspective, the brain loves reward. We have a reward center. Why do we crave sugar? Why do we want to, do the fun thing before we do the hard thing? So we really enjoy it, and our brain is really keen on it too. So the brain really loves to be rewarded, and then we personally like reward. And I would say most of us, and even most humans, are risk averse, right? We don't like risk. We want to stay safe, and the brain wants you to stay safe. So, but there are genuine risks to staying where you are and not moving forward. And if the risk outweighs the reward, it's actually a formula. So if you look at a fraction, risk over reward, if you flip it and the reward is higher than the risk, you're going to stay, generally speaking, we stay stuck. So what needs to happen to shift the risk to reward ratio? Well, sometimes it's a crisis, right? We're making a change even if we don't want to, because now we're at a high-risk, acute triage situation. This is happening. We don't have a choice. Some people create a crisis Who's nagging you, right? Who's on your case? Your kids, your spouse, who's pushing the button for you? That is someone or something, or even for yourself, trying to create a little bit of chaos. So when chaos occurs, pay attention to that. Like, even if it's little, I'm afraid, or someone keeps talking to me about this, and I'm staying comfortable over here. I don't want to take a risk. But change will occur sometimes without our choice because the crisis is too big. So that's one of the reasons why people stay in a posture of not changing. So that's just something to think about.
And I feel like the last few years, just with COVID and all that we experienced here, that really turned things on its head. And people who were comfortable in the situation that they were, whether they were living in a senior community or living in a home, so much of that was determined with your support system around you, because for some people it was great. We stayed home with our kids and played games and cooked and had fun and watched movies, and other people were stuck in their homes by themselves. It was just night and day depending on your situation, either a very somewhat positive thing or very, very negative, depending on that. So let's jump into the physical symptoms that many of us feel when we contemplate important decisions. And would you say that these symptoms get more pronounced as people age?
Okay, well, this is completely my realm therapeutically, is the physiological effects of anxiety, stress, decision making, and certainly we all experience anxiety and stress and physiological response to triggers or risk taking. And one of the things that I work with my clients is just how to bring your body to a natural state of relaxation and calm. Because one of the things that happens when we get overwhelmed, and Jason, you're going to be talking about overwhelm in one of your questions too as well, is our brain gets flooded. So this prefrontal cortex, this front of your brain, which is the last area of the brain that develops, is prone to overwhelm and flooding. So when our nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system goes up, our somatic, our nervous system goes up, high activation, this frontal lobe gets diminished. It's been shown in scans and research. And what is the prefrontal cortex doing? It's helping you make decisions. That's the area where logic, reasonable, rational, cause and effect. If I do this, then this will happen. If I don't do this, then that will happen. So if we worry too much and get anxious all the time, then we have a harder time thinking straight. It's proven. So one of the things I want to do today, real quick, if we have time.
Absolutely.
I'm just doing it anyways, is I want to show you an exercise. And I was actually doing this in the car on the way here. Because when we can tell that our nervous system is aroused, which I was doing that. I was driving here, and what was I doing? I was thinking about this talk, and oh my goodness, am I ready? And how many people are going to be there? And I've never done this before. And so I started to get worried and nervous. And all of a sudden, my arousal level went up, and guess what happened? My breathing changed. I actually could not get a deep breath. And it happened almost automatically within seconds. So this is what I did. I started breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, very slowly. Inhale, and I want everyone to do this now. Inhale with your nose. Hold it. Exhale very slowly. Do it again. Inhale. Hold it. Exhale. Now, this isn't just some wackadoodle quacky stuff I'm showing you. This is science. So your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system work together. So sympathetic is, I'm worried, and so you get sympathy. Parasympathetic, bring it down with a parachute. So we can bring our body down just by breathing. So that's one technique I want you to think about the next time your brain is flooded.
I just like the word wackadoodle. So this is a little bit of a different spin on that. So what are some other tools that we can use when we start to feel anxious or even spiraling down this rabbit hole of doom is what I call it, when we're thinking about a change? Even one where we anticipate being in a better place, and yet, you know, I have things that I'm contemplating in my life, and 1 minute I'm so excited about that, and then the next minute I'm like, oh, but then I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and oh my gosh, I don't have time, and I don't have time now, and how am I going to do this? And we can see ourselves spiraling, and yet it can be really challenging to stop that. So what are some concrete tools that we can use to do that better?
Okay, there's several in this one. So I also practice cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. So I think about cognitive processes and kind of what your mind is doing, and it's usually your thoughts. So what is your narrative? So one of the first things I'm doing clinically when my client comes in is I talk about, what do you think about? What's it like in there? What are the stories you're telling yourself? And there's a fancy term we use called cognitive distortions. And you can look this up. It's very commonly talked about. And cognitive distortions are what if thinking, well, what if this goes wrong? What if that happens? What if I can't do it? What if I'm not ready? What if I don't have enough money? What if the economy tanks? What if my kids won't help me? What if I get sick? So what if thinking is a bit of a rabbit hole. So we really don't know the what ifs, but we do think about it. And so one of the things we say there is catch yourself if you're stuck in a cognitive distortion. And use your prefrontal cortex, that logical brain, to fight what is going on with your imaginary self. So we can create all kinds of stories. Another one is, another cognitive distortion is catastrophic thinking, worst case scenario. And we think about catastrophic thinking and worst case scenarios to keep ourselves safe, right? This is a good thing. This isn't bad to think about the future and what potentially could go wrong. We should have a plan. We should have a catastrophe plan. I have a catastrophe plan for my practice. If I get hit by a bus going from here to my office today, Dan over there on his cell phone is going to show up, and he's going to be the dude who notifies all my clients, and even a colleague is his backup in case he has to go to the hospital with me. So of course we have catastrophic planning, but catastrophic thinking can keep you really stuck, and it's considered a cognitive distortion if that's all we're thinking about. So you want to check the evidence of your cognitive distortion. That's the first thing you do. I would say, okay, well, what evidence do you have to support this thought that you're having? Oh, well, I don't know. I'm just worried. Okay, well then we don't really have any evidence, do we? Or you know what, last time I did this, I ended up in the hospital. Or last time I did this, I ran out of money. Or last time I did, so there could be some evidence, and we talk about that. And we evaluate the kind of the basis for thinking this way. But we shouldn't be stuck in cognitive distortions. They're not healthy. And our mind and our body, again, will think that whatever you're thinking about is real, even if it's imagined. So try to shift your thinking. Oh, it's a beautiful sunny day. I'm grateful for, make a list of all the things you're grateful for. maybe I'm thinking too much about this thing. I should shift and do something else. I got to distract myself to get out of that rabbit hole. So the way we think really does get in the way and impact our decision making.
No, that's a great point. And one thing I'd like to add is that idea that as you say things out loud, your brain will perceive these things to be true, regardless of whether they are or not. And so I find that, of course, this happens with negative thinking, but it will also happen with positive thinking. And that's something that, like, I try and often do, is that idea of feeding ourselves positive messages, sometimes that even are not yet true, but that getting our brains to believe those things will help those items come true. So hopefully that might be a little bit helpful. So I've often gotten through making challenging decisions with the idea that even by making an imperfect decision, it's usually better than no decision at all, and that I'm ready to accept whatever consequences go along with whatever decision that is. Do you feel like that's a healthy model or potentially risky?
It's both. Yeah, so I think that we need to be careful in terms of how we go about making change, and oftentimes we don't know what the outcome's going to be until we start to take some action. So I think there's validity in both, getting moving, getting going, but also just kind of, without a plan. I think, people make a plan and then take a step. I also think of the metaphor of a door, behold, I place before you an open door. I might not know what's on the other side of the door, but my job is to take a step through the door. And I also like the breadcrumb metaphor, follow the breadcrumbs. You never know. You never know where you might end up. And I love C.S. Lewis's quote about you're never too old to start a new dream or to make a change and start something new. So I think that your point is valid, and I would obviously exercise care and caution.
And I just have to take a shout out to my husband standing in the back, because I am so often grateful for the things that he has talked me out of after the fact, that I was so convinced was a good decision. And then weeks or months later, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't do that. And so I would just say that idea of having a sounding board, having a friend, a family member, a therapist, a doctor, a trusted person in whatever you are thinking to bounce these ideas off of, that will give you an objective opinion, but that who also cares for you, and that will not just, they're not out there to just squash your dreams, right, Mark? Sometimes I feel like that, but no, just kidding. No, they're there to be an objective person to help you evaluate some of these really, really important changes that you might be making. So I know that you have a very specialized expertise. You touched on it a little bit ago, called the neurofeedback brain training. Can you tell us more about what that is and how it works?
Yeah, thank you. So this is a plug for my, specialty. So I work with all ages and stages of life. So anyone who has a brain is a good client, and most of us have one, so that's good. Although we don't know for sure sometimes. No. All kidding aside, so what I do is I help brains perform better. So it's similar to physical therapy for your brain or brain exercise. So it's very non-invasive and comfortable and relaxing, and I teach brains to perform better. So anyone with ADHD, so my students who are struggling to complete a task or homework, or studying or preparing for the LSAT or MCAT, or even just high school exams, middle school exams. So the student population is big for me. Kiddos, my youngest is 5 and my oldest client is 89. So usually anyone who is struggling with brain performance issues. So it's usually a person who doesn't sleep very well. Insomnia is a big category for me. migraine headaches, chronic pain, memory, anxiety, stress. And brain training is a scientifically based modality that is proven to work, and it's a medication alternative to these treatments. So it's non-invasive, and it takes about 20 sessions. So if you're thinking of doing it, you've got to be committed to doing it, because the brain is a real juggernaut. Like, it gets stuck in patterns, and we just have to teach the brain to formulate new patterns and new neural pathways. And guess what, folks? We all now know, don't we, that the brain can generate. It's regenerative. We used to think that the brain stopped growing and stopped improving after we stopped growing. But up until the time that we say goodbye to this good earth, our brain is capable of regenerating and creating new neural pathways. So stroke victims, anyone who's had an accident, traumatic brain injury, we have wonderful modalities, not just neurofeedback, to help brains work better. And if we have a good brain, we generally feel better and we generally act better. So that's one of the things that I specialize in. Thank you.
I'm going to throw in, do you have any stories that you can share of people that you've worked with that have, really come back from some of these challenging things in their life after doing neurofeedback?
Oh my gosh, okay. If I had an hour, but because of HIPAA, right, I'm a confidential clinician, so I can't reveal any specific stuff except for my mom, who gives me permission to talk about her because she's awesome. So she's 91, and she lives on her own, and she drives and goes to Meijer and gets her groceries, and she is independent, and I just want to be her when I grow up. I just love her so much. But she did neurofeedback when she was 86, I think, and primarily just because I wanted to practice on her and just see what would happen. And and at the time, I didn't know it, but she was struggling with anxiety and high blood pressure. And her anxiety is gone, and her blood pressure, she is medication free. So that's one example. And then my husband, who's in the back of the room, who I've made fun of already a couple times, he is a sleep dysregulation person, so he doesn't sleep great, and he's a headache guy. So he started neurofeedback, I don't know, honey, like 10 years ago? Yeah, and now he doesn't sleep perfect, but he doesn't get up all the time like he used to, and he sleeps through the night now, and he's primarily like, once he's up, because his brain starts going. So he's just got an active, busy brain, and that's very common. So sometimes he'll come in for maintenance sessions, and then I don't even know the last time you had a migraine. Yeah, so he's been headache-free for years. So those are a couple of examples. And then students, oh my gosh, families, kiddos, they can leave the soccer field and their son is able to enjoy and play well with others. We all know those kids that are behaviorally challenged, that are kicking and screaming or biting or hitting or suspended from school. Those brains are dysregulated, and I've worked very well in that realm. And then also the ADHD, not able to concentrate, not able to focus and get off of their Adderall. Those are huge success stories for me as well. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll have more opportunity in the question and answer section. But Dr. Beckrow, welcome back. I am so happy to have you back. It's been a couple of years. And you're a specialist in the area of palliative care with the Trillium Institute. And while palliative care is not our main focus today, can you tell the audience a little bit about your mission with the Trillium Institute and kind of what drove you to specialize in that area of medicine once upon a time?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But before I do, first of all, thank you. That was fantastic. You saw me taking a lot of notes here, and would love to talk to you more about so many of these topics. And really, again, the topic here today, decision making, that really is kind of where I spend a majority of my time professionally. And you asked about the mission of Trillium Institute. It really is about educating patients and then empowering patients to make the choices that are best for them at whatever stage of life they are. And I'm so grateful to be here today, because I would For every family I counsel and work with in the ICU, I mean, we have, 75-ish people here today?
Something like that.
Which means, when you take every person that's here and everyone that loves them, I mean, literally thousands of people can be impacted here. So this is a wonderful opportunity to talk about decision-making for, again, big ticket items when you're talking about your health and at end of life and things like that.
Definitely. So how has working with families in palliative care influenced how you would advise a patient who struggles with a state of overwhelm when they're considering important life decisions?
Yeah. So again, my training is as a medical oncologist. I'm very fortunate. I wear a lot of hats, and most of them are things that really bring me a lot of joy. So one of them right now is teaching medical students. I had the pleasure this year of literally meeting some students in their first week of medical school. So you can think of the...
Overwhelm.
Yes, a bit of that, but they're excited and they're pure. I've been practicing a long time, so most physicians, we become highly institutionalized. We can become somewhat narrow in our thinking because this has always worked, so why don't you just do what I tell you to do? And we need to break that. So when I meet students who are brand new and idealistic and all that, it's just incredible. So, but throughout my career, and actually throughout my life, thank you for talking about your mom. One of my favorite stories to tell is about my grandmother. And I remember when I was... This was the summer just before I started medical school. My grandfather was dying. He had COPD, and he had caught pneumonia. He's in a hospital. He's on a ventilator. And one of the things I think about a lot when I'm with patients, or the why of what I do, my grandfather was dying on a ventilator, and we had to have, quote unquote, the talk. My grandmother was surrounded by her 3 children who agreed that if Grandpa's heart should stop, let's let him go. But it was Grandma who had to sign that document. And because they had never talked about it, my grandma carried the guilt with her that she had killed my grandfather. And that really, really impacted me. The fact of the matter is, Joe Camel, my grandfather probably started smoking when he was in his teens, and that's what killed my grandfather. But because there was no proactive discussions and decision-making, my grandmother carried that guilt with her for the rest of her life. And that's part of the big part of the why I do this work, and I feel grateful for the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that subject a little bit more later on. So have you noticed a difference in decision-making style based on the age of your parents, or your patients, sorry, or do you feel that the circumstances and the personality of each individual person makes more of a difference on decision-making?
Yeah, so just in general, as we get older, we tend to get wiser. And so it's just, again, a joy for me to meet people at various stages of life. Oftentimes I will be hosting a family meeting with multiple generations, and just to see the collective wisdom. But then there's also, let's face it, death and dying is not a conversation we're very comfortable talking about as a society. Almost all of us have a very, at least somewhat of a spiritual base, and so we're aware of it, and that's a big part of our spirituality and our faith and whatnot. But then talking about it, kind of at that, specific or granular level, we're not that comfortable. So I've noticed that those who have dealt with difficulty before, difficulty personally, when I've met parents who have maybe had to deal with the loss of a child, people who have maybe struggled with lost, career, divorce, put substance abuse, people who have struggled are also those who have struggled and worked through it, then are better and more ready to have these conversations. And so that's kind of a long-winded way, I think, of saying embrace your struggles, because it is through our struggles oftentimes that we learn the most.
I had just read something recently about one of the best things that we can allow our children to do is to fail. And I know that looking back, that's a tough one.
Sure.
That's a really tough one. It's so often our role with our kids and with our other loved ones, we want to protect them. We don't want to ever see them go through something challenging.
Sure.
And yet what you're saying is that resilience is what then helps us get propelled through life in a better way.
Yeah. I mean, in life, stuff happens. I could have said a different word that starts with S, but I'll say stuff happens. And yeah, it's how we deal with the stuff when it happens, or how we're prepared for it.
So what are some of the things that your patients have found most helpful when faced with a diagnosis or other life circumstance that requires large and often unwelcome changes?
Again, a lot of what we try to do is, think of everything that disease takes from not just a patient, but everyone who loves that patient. A big change in me and my family since we talked last is I'm very proud to say that my wife now is a breast cancer survivor. And I am just so, I am so grateful that all the experiences we had that led up to that diagnosis, that helped us navigate through that, but it was so eye-opening to me. Things I thought, the losing of one's hair. I'd oftentimes talk about side effects of chemotherapy, and usually patients the first day they see me, they'll ask, I'm sorry you have cancer. First 3 questions are, am I going to live or die? We need to talk about that. Do I or do I not need chemo? And doc, am I going to lose my hair? And having known that, but then when it was my turn to take Kate to, I'll probably get emotional, but her stylist opened up the shop an hour before, and when it started to fall out and cut her hair. It was about Thanksgiving 2 years ago, and just seeing the impact on her. Those are the things that we need to recognize what illness and disease takes from patients, and that as medical professionals, we aim to give that back. And so a lot of times when I first meet patients, the first thing we do is, especially if the patient is unable to speak for themselves, to the family, I'll ask, tell me about your loved one, tell me about your dad, tell me about your mom. And when we're only talking about the disease, we're missing so much. Let's talk about the person. And if we focus then on the person and what was valuable to them, what's important to them, then as we come to these fork in the road decision points, what would they have wanted? But it takes that step of getting to know the person, and oftentimes I get to know that person by who loves them and who they are surrounded by.
That was an awesome answer, and thanks so much for sharing that, because I think that all of us, we can talk about these things all day long, and then yet when our families go through them, it's night and day different. And I've had that, those experiences in my life as well, of talking about things and then all of a sudden going through it and thinking back to conversations that I may have given advice on something that I truly didn't know about until I had experienced it for myself. And it's definitely different. So much of this series revolves around the idea of starting a conversation, and often about topics that can be so challenging to bring up. So how do you encourage families to proactively discuss these important life decisions while they still have the ability to evaluate those options, and especially for the person that the decision revolves around?
Yeah, and again, that's why I'm so grateful that this program exists, and to be able to have this conversation today. As we discussed, change not easy. Decision making, I mean, sometimes, what may seem to some as a mundane decision is a very challenging. So I think just calling that out, that change is not easy, making these decisions is not easy, but it's important. And everyone in this room is here because they've made a lot of important decisions and choices throughout their life. That is how we got here. I think what's also important is I oftentimes will hear families, patients make statements of, I don't want to be a burden. And whenever I hear certain words, I then like to kind of tease out, well, tell me more about that, or what do you actually mean about that? And I'd kind of like to maybe flip that on its ear and say, well, hell yeah, I want to be a burden. I've got 2 beautiful kids. I love them. I would do anything for them. I think one of the best parts of being a parent is when you have that feeling that if a train was coming down the tracks and they're on the rails, you would push them out of the way, even if it meant the train ran you over. And that's a beautiful thing and a beautiful feeling. But there are some burdens that my wife and I had to experience to make sure they had everything we need. So they're a burden to me, and I want to be a burden to them, and I want to celebrate the heck out of that. That's what love is all about. Burden can be a beautiful thing. So when someone says to me, I don't want to be a burden, again, let's talk about what's most important to you. Would you like to be able to relieve your children of maybe making these decisions? If so, let's talk about it now while you can. Let your kids know what's important to you. 2 big things I'm going to hit on a lot. If you haven't already, I really would encourage you to consider the concept of advanced care planning. And just some simple things. Let your loved ones know exactly things I absolutely would never want, things I would absolutely yes want, and those things kind of in the middle. Talk about it early, talk about it often. And then if you were unable to speak for yourself, who is the one person or team of people that you would want making those choices? And make that well known to them, to other people in your life, have it documented. So I think that's a whole nother series. But just those 2 things. There are certain things you would absolutely never want. I hear a lot of times patients say, doc, I would never want to be kept alive just on machines. But yet if we don't have that conversation, if you come into the ER at my hospital tonight, that's exactly what's going to happen until I know otherwise. And I would rather that you have those conversations proactively with your loved ones so that you're not in the position that my grandma was, 20 years ago.
So do you think we should talk about that next week at Thanksgiving? Hey guys, I have an announcement. I just want to tell you, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. I'm joking.
To a certain degree, though, absolutely.
Why not, right?
Right? I think there are opportunities to leverage that to make it more practical. We can talk about that. But if you're at Thanksgiving dinner and you're with a loved one that you're not sure if they'll be with us next Thanksgiving or 10 Thanksgivings from now, why not, out of love, be that burden? And it doesn't have to be the only thing we talk about. Hopefully the Lions are having a good game too, and the turkey tastes good. But I do like to reframe it that it absolutely can be a gift.
In a perfect world, what are the most important decisions that you wish every single patient had on their radar? You kind of answered that, but maybe elaborate on it.
Sure. And I like to simplify things. I need things pretty simple, so I like to break it down into, like when we would take the kids to get ice cream and there's like 30,000 flavors, we usually give them 3, right? Otherwise, we're going to be there all night. So I like to kind of break things down into digestible chunks. So when it comes to things like end of life, and maybe I'll lead into that by talking about my experience as a cancer physician. My job as a physician is not to tell you what to do. My job, first and foremost, is I'm a teacher, right? My job is to educate my patients on what's going on, about the disease, the treatment options, help empower them. I love that word. My professional tagline is educating, same situation, we could come up with 4 different answers. My patients will usually come in one of 3 flavors. So there we go again, chocolate, vanilla, or butter pecan. And on the one end of the spectrum, I'm going to have a patient come into my office, say, Doc, I want first-line therapy, second-line therapy, clinical trials. Doc, if I'm going to die, I want an IV in my arm and chemotherapy going through that. And I have to respect that. On the other end of the spectrum is usually a wiser, someone who's maybe seen this a time or 2 and says, Doc, that chemo stuff you give that people, that's poison. You'll never touch me with that stuff. If I've got any time left, I'd rather go fishing with my grandchildren one more time. And I need to respect that. And then many patients are going to be somewhere in the middle. Doc, I don't necessarily want all these things over here, but I got to try something. And my job is to meet that patient where they're at. So when it comes to end-of-life planning, I think 3 things to consider. 1, Doc, I want every machine you got. If my heart stops, I want you to do everything they do in the movies. Shock my heart as many times as you can. Cryopreserve me, anything you want. Everything and anything all the time. And I need to respect that. Someone over here saying, Doc, I've had a good life. I know my time may be limited. And again, I would rather spend my time with my family than stuck in your waiting room. So under no circumstances, take me back to the hospital. I'm going to sign this DNR form. Do everything you can, to help me getting to that point. But I don't want to go back to the hospital. If I'm going to die, I want to be in my bed surrounded by my friends and family. I've got patients that'll say, do nothing right now, but then a crisis occurs. Do everything. You have the right to change your minds. I want to empower you to be able to do that. But if you talk about it proactively, I think your loved ones will know that. So that's one thing in advanced care planning. The other thing, like I said, if for whatever reasons tomorrow you can't speak for yourself, who do you entrust to make those decisions for you? Let's have that conversation. Let's make sure it's well known. Right, maybe at halftime, the Lions hopefully are up a few touchdowns. Let's confirm everything we talked about last Thanksgiving, and then let's get on to dessert.
No, I think that's a great thought, because I find that often this is one of the busiest times of the year for people all of a sudden thinking about possibly moving into a senior community or downsizing. Revolves around getting together at the holidays, and then all of a sudden seeing a family member that you haven't seen in a while, and realizing that they're struggling more than you had known when you only spoke to them over the phone. And I think that can be really, really powerful when you start to see it in person, but it also gives us great opportunities. So on your website, I want to go back to the idea of how family members can struggle with this immense guilt when they're forced to make decisions for a loved one, and the outcome, they feel responsible for this outcome when none of the options that they're presented with are great. And I feel like so often in our lives when we're, working with our parents and trying to encourage them to do something, what advice can you give family members who struggle with decision guilt, or even the idea of trying to push their family members in any particular direction in life?
Yeah, there's a lot of areas I want to approach that question, because there is the patient and family dynamic, but then there's also the healthcare dynamic as well. So I think I want to circle back a bit to that, and that's why, again, I love teaching medical students, because how I set up the question can really impact how the patient and their families react to the question, and how they deal with it both in real time and then as time goes on. I see a lot of patients and their families, and I think for right now, we'll talk specifically about a patient who, for whatever reason, is incapacitated. Right? Maybe they're on a ventilator in the ICU, they're not conscious, and we're talking to family members. Oftentimes it is a spouse trying to make decisions for their spouse, surrounded maybe by children, grandchildren. There's always the niece or nephew from California that flew in on the red eye that hasn't seen grandpa in a long time, and stuff like that. I oftentimes see families wrestling with the belief, the concept that there is one singular perfect answer. There are 999,999 wrong answers, but there's one perfect right answer, and if we nail it, we'll navigate through this narrow corridor, and our loved one is not only going to survive, but they're going to thrive and all these things. And if I, as a physician, lead my patients to believe that if that exists, that it's all on you, and we don't get that outcome, yeah, that is going to increase a lot of patients' guilt. So I need to help families see a lot of times we're not choosing between good and bad, right? Sometimes unfortunately, we have a lot of bad options here. What's our best bad option? And the concept of pushing one to a decision. As physicians, we oftentimes, I hate to say that, we're guilty of doing exactly that. Because based on my 25 years of experience, I know with 99% certainty how this is going to go. And why can't you figure this out? And so oftentimes my team is called to push. No pushing. We educate, and then we empower the patients to make the choices that are best for them, even though it's a choice I might not make for myself. Now, there are certain guidelines. As a medical oncologist, there is a line. Above that line, giving more chemo is going to give a high likelihood of benefit. Below that line, my chemo is probably going to cause more pain and suffering and maybe end the patient's life sooner. When we're below that line, it is my obligation to tell you that, and I will not offer you chemo then. I will offer you the opportunity for a second opinion, but when we're below that line, if I feel I'm first, remember, first do no harm, right? So how we set up the question, I think, is very important. And then we try to get our families not to ask what is right for them, but what would your loved one, what would they choose if they were given 5 minutes to come out of that bed and say, what I want is. If we transfer it to not what I think is right, but what would my mother, my father, what would they choose? Now I've made an informed decision based on the 50 plus years that I've had the pleasure of knowing those people.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I usually get them on the back end. So you are working with the patient during their treatment.
Yeah.
And then once a loved one has passed, then they oftentimes become a client of mine, right? Like the ones left behind are dealing with the guilt of the decision making and the grief and walking through that process. So one thing I would just add is that virtually every decision you can second guess yourself.
100%.
And in the grief stage, we often do that. We are second guessing, if I had done it this way, then maybe Dad wouldn't have suffered as much. Or if I had done it that way, it could have, he could have lived longer. So again, that's a bit of cognitive distortions, right? Like, what if I had done this? What if I had done that? But legitimate grief, that's something we all have to walk through. So we have the mourning process, and then we have the grief after that. And one thing that occurs oftentimes that I talk with my clients about is false guilt versus real guilt. So false guilt is, I should have done something different. It's my fault. I should have known. They're feeling bad, so I feel guilty. So we take on other people's guilt. We feel guilty when we really haven't done anything wrong, and that's false guilt. Real guilt is when we are culpable. And we know when we've been culpable. You got your hand in the cookie jar and Mom walked in and there you are with the cookie. You took it. You're guilty, right? So if you've done something where you are legitimately culpable, then we call that real guilt, and we have a process we deal with letting that go and forgiving yourself and moving on and reconciliation with the partner or person that you've offended and all of that. But when we're dealing with end-of-life decisions and the grief process, we're oftentimes walking in false guilt.
I love that term. We talk a lot about the concept of hope, false hope and grounded hope. I wish my med students were here to hear that kind of, because again, how we present the information to our patients can set up. Again, if I lead you to believe that there's one and only one perfect answer and you didn't find it, that person will be grieving with that false hope. So that can be on us as professionals to help legitimize exactly.
Yeah, and the bottom line is, life is hard. As we get older, and especially as you get into 60s, 70s, 80s, and even beyond, as you're faced with more and more difficult decisions, there are no perfect answers. every day we simply have to do the very best with what we have, and as we make a decision, we need to reevaluate. I'm often talking with people that we list their house and it doesn't sell for one reason or another. And I tell every seller, we do all the best practices we can. We do everything possible to put ourselves in the very best position, and then we listen for feedback. We do all the things, and then we listen for feedback, and we evaluate that feedback, and then make a decision of where do I go from here. So it's very much a process, and it kind of aligns with what we're talking about today. It's just this constant realigning of all I've got is from this day forward, and I'm just going to take this day and I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to continue to make the best decisions with what I have, and when I need to change my mind, I'll change my mind.
I really love how you kind of frame that, right? We do the best we can to create the best outcome possible, and then, what was the phrase? We listen for feedback. I think if we all do that in all of our lives, and part of that is focusing on, I think part of this too is, are we focusing on our loss and what we're losing, or how lucky we are to be here and everything we've gained? And I tell my patients a lot, this line of work isn't always the easiest thing to do, but what my patients teach me every day is to appreciate this moment. How lucky am I? How lucky are we that we're here to be able to contemplate that, to use our neocortex to think about that. As I was reading my breakfast this morning, I saw a young person my son's age in the obits. And I think about, how precious life is and how fortunate we are to be here. And I think why we're here is to help you maximize that, to live life as fully as possible.
While we're on that subject, you have an amazing podcast that addresses all of these taboo subjects that we often handle here in the room. Tell us a little bit more about how that podcast came about and some of the subjects that you tackle on that.
That is a lot of fun, and it's another one of those stories that's kind of a happy accident, that because of the pandemic, right? It kind of starts there. I work very closely with a physician here in town named John Mulder. Dr. Mulder is my mentor. He is the type of doc I want to be when I grow up someday. He has taught me so much. He's forgotten more than I'll probably ever know. And in 2019, John asked me to do, they were just setting up the Trillium Institute. It's a wonderful story how that came to be. And I'll let John tell that story when he's here in a couple of weeks.
He's going to be here next month.
But he asked me to, kind of do some consulting work with him. And sure enough, we decided we're going to start in April 2020. In April 2020, there was this thing that came online called COVID-19. Has anyone heard of that? So we ended up just doing a bunch of Zoom calls, and we realized we had this neat kind of conversation going. So we actually kind of just thought, what if we record these? And that's kind of what led to our podcast. And I think one of the biggest purposes of it is to make that word taboo. I mean, there's a lot of things in life that maybe we're uncomfortable with, but they're important. My kids are now, my youngest just turned 20. So I think of all the taboo things we had to talk about as they were teenagers. But thank goodness we did, right? And so, death and dying isn't always the easiest topic, but planning, being proactive, autonomy, having my rights and wishes respected. I think if we focus on those areas, then it's not taboo, it's just good common sense.
Awesome. And how would they listen to that if they wanted to listen to that?
Yeah, I think our website is trilliuminstitute.org. I did bring some flyers, so if you could make those available and have them for when John is here. But I'm pretty sure if you just Google Trillium Institute or Trillium Institute Grand Rapids, I'm pretty sure it's trilliuminstitute.org, and then there'll be a little click where you can find the podcast.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you want to chime in before we head into our question and answer?
Yeah, just real briefly, I'll share another family story myself. and this is revolving around my mom. And I think the key here is, again, to focus on it, is it what we're losing or what we're gaining? About a year and a half ago, my father passed away a few years ago. So my mom's been living by herself for some time. And, she is very independent, very proud. But I work in this sphere, and I know all sorts of good people who could help my mom. So I wanted to connect her to the Area Agency on Aging in Saginaw County, where she lives. And that conversation about 18 months ago went like, well, I'll just paraphrase. What the hell are you talking about? You guys just want to put me in a home. It turned pretty, I'm like, oh, yikes. So here I do this all day long, and the one person that's probably most important to me for that this conversation, like, oh, look how triggering this was. Over the course of the 18 months, she has slowly opened up to some of those services. About a year ago, she had a case manager come. Recently, she's had a significant change in her living situation where she's needed much more help. And now all of a sudden, she has gone from what the heck are you doing or talking about to now she's practically the marketing director. She's got, I've got visiting nurses coming in and they fill my pillbox, and I got someone to get groceries for me, and they help me find someone to take up my trash. This is the best thing ever. So it's not always easy. It's not easy for us to do it all day with our own family. So if you're struggling with it, that makes you normal, but keep struggling.
Okay, thank you both so much. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to open it up now to questions from the audience.
This question's for the doctor. Could you explain the difference between palliative care and hospice care?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And again, we can do a whole seminar on that. Hospice care is pure palliation, comfort care at end of life. So as a medical oncologist, when I meet someone on the first day, we usually are talking about a treatment plan, the chemotherapy. When we get to a point to where the treatment is worse than the disease itself, or the disease is growing through multiple chemotherapies, and the patient says, doc, I've had enough. The symptoms of the chemo are hurting me more. I want to hit the pause button on chemo. I now want to focus on the best quality of life I can have. We'll hit the pause button on chemotherapy and open up hospice care, where now we're focusing on quality of life, symptom control. We're not doing anything at this point to curb the disease. We're focusing on making sure the patient's not painful or suffering. And again, if we do it well, maximizing quality of life. I'm a big proponent of hospice care because you get now coming to your home, wherever home is for you, a nurse, a social worker. Your meds are now generally brought to you rather than you having to go to the pharmacy to pick them up. So think on this end, pure treatment. On this end, pure comfort care. Think of palliative medicine as the bridge between those two worlds. While we're actively treating the cancer, let's talk about worst case scenarios. Let's have a plan for that. If we've thought about worst case scenarios and have a plan for it, now if we come to that fork in the road, it's less taboo, right? What are the treatments I would want? What are the treatments I would never want? If I can't decide for myself, who do I want deciding for me, and do they know what's important to me, those types of things. So palliative medicine is bridging the two worlds of acute treatment and therapies, be it chemotherapy or cardiovascular disease, with all the modality, whatever the disease. Anyone with a life-altering illness deserves to have someone working with them on what are the most effective treatments, and then planning for once those treatments are either no longer beneficial or worst case scenario when they become more harmful than the disease itself. And then we transition to hospice care. So again, think of palliative medicine as the bridge of those two worlds. Thank you for asking that. Okay, the question is, what is Trillium Institute? And so it's many things. It's really meant for the community to get this type of education. Okay, we're focusing on palliative medicine, so there are physicians that work there. We work closely with Faith Hospice and another group called Holland Home, which is, again, a lot of services for senior living and things such as that to educate and empower patients to be able to make choices. There is a clinic attached to that so that patients can be referred there, and I'm going to allow John to talk more about that when he's here on December 12th. But ultimately, it's kind of to help answer the question that was asked in the back. What is the difference between palliative medicine and hospice? Hold it, I just saw my cardiologist. He says my congestive heart failure is getting a little worse. We're still treating it, but he sent me to someone called palliative medicine. Isn't that hospice? No, it is about empowering patients to understand your disease process, the treatment options that are available to you. How far do we want to push this? What are the things we wouldn't want? And empower you to make those choices. Okay. So I think of it largely as an educational organization.
Let's say we have a loved one that's going through the catastrophic thinking right now, and they're displaying either the fight, flight, or fawn. How do we help them check the evidence so that they can understand the perspective of the person that's bringing that concern to their attention?
Very good question. So it kind of depends on the state that they're in. So if the person can have a logical, reasonable, rational conversation, and we know who those people are, right? And we know those who are not. So it depends on whether they can calm themselves enough to bring down that flooding in the prefrontal cortex. So if someone is really worked up and anxious and scared and rattled, it is almost harmful to come at them from the posture of trying to apply logic to that situation. So the first step is empathy. And I know that's a really overused word right now, right? Be empathetic. I'm sure this is really hard for you. So there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is throwing someone a lifeline when they're drowning. Empathy is jumping in the water. So sympathy is a little bit patronizing. Oh, I'm so sorry, you poor thing. Oh, that keeps people stuck and keeps people in a victim posture. So empathy is, wow, that sounds big. I don't really know what that's about, but can you tell me? What are you experiencing right now? What's it like to be you? Empathy is walking in someone else's shoes, and we're usually not very good at that because we're busy and we've got lots to do, or we're kind of thinking of ourselves. So it just depends on the situation, of course. But if I were if it was my loved one, like it was my dad or my mom or my older sister, I would approach them with compassion and empathy first, because if we try to apply logic to someone who's just rattled and aroused, that's just going to make them more upset. So we try to come at the person with some, maybe you can't talk to your sister about it. Can we just bring in a friend? Or I'm going to bring my dog next time because my dog is very calming for her, right? Or I'm going to try and find a way in which to help her relax and calm down. You never say, you sound really aroused right now, maybe you should calm down. Like, no. Don't tell someone they're aroused because they already know. Or telling them they should calm down, or just get a hold of yourself. That's not empathy. So empathy is proven to bring down arousal, and I would start there. Just tell me what it's like for you. How's that feel? What are you going through? And hey, would you be open to? And then I would set the stage with, would you be open to talking a little bit more about kind of your maybe I wouldn't say rabbit hole that you're in right now, but just kind of this spiral that you have going, or it must be really uncomfortable. Would you like some help? So we don't fix it for people, we offer resources. So is there anything I can do to help? Would you like me to see if we can find a therapist for someone you can talk to other than me, because I'm not objective, I'm your family member. So it's really hard when you're closely related to someone too. I hope that helps.
Again, a lot of these scenarios are highly charged for a lot of reasons. Yeah. The scenario itself is traumatic. And we just think of the concept of trauma, and again, how that information comes into our midbrain, and does it go up to our cortex, our conscious thinking mind, we're kind of down more, right, to our reptilian brain, which is reaction. And so if you are ever in a situation where each and every one of us has a little Mr. Spock in us, right? What's most logical? Remember, Spock was half Vulcan and half human, so he's got the logical side and the emotional side. And it's relatively easy for us to have these conversations with families that are not our own. Right. But yet again, when I talked to my mother the first time and she got very triggered, I immediately went into my logical brain and let me show you some statistics and let me not having any of it. So if you're having a situation where, man, this is not going according to plan, again, give yourself some grace. That makes you normal. It took me about 18 months to figure that out.
I'd just like to put in a plug for palliative care. I, too, am a breast cancer survivor, and I would not have made it through without palliative care. I was in the hospital. They came and offered it to me. I said, oh my gosh, am I dying? No, you're not dying. We just want you to be more comfortable. And that is what got me through it.
Okay, we probably have time for one more question. If there's anyone. Okay, we're going to go right here up in the front just because. And understand, these guys will be around for a little bit afterwards. And by all means, if you have a question that hasn't gotten answered or is more personal, let us know, and we'll make sure that you have the opportunity to get that answered after the fact.
I just wonder if you're ever too old to get brain trained, because I think I have ADHD, probably have had it all my life. I have a very busy brain. My focus is here and there and everywhere.
I love it. Yeah. So her question was, are you ever too old to get brain training? First of all, you're never too old to do a bunch of stuff. So, but yeah, there's a lot of undiagnosed adult ADHD out there. So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So it can present in a bunch of different ways. So absolutely not. If you have a brain and you can sit for 30 minutes once a week, you're good. Thank you for asking.
Thank you.
All right, before we move on to the next step, I just want to, if we can get a round of applause for these guys. I am just so grateful for the amazing people that I have the opportunity to bring up to this stage that share their time and their expertise despite very busy lives and busy schedules, and it just has really meant the world to have you guys here. So I appreciate that.